So following up on my last video that I made, where I was comparing fundamentalism and liberalism or progressivism and atheism, I wanted to connect, and fundamentalism, all kinds of isms. I wanted to connect MAGA and evangelicalism, because this whole thing started in the other video from watching a critique of Frank Turek, who is a fundamentalist apologist, and crap, I forgot her name. It just flew out of my brain. It doesn't matter who, but a MAGA, apologist for MAGA. So two apologists, one for fundamentalism, one for MAGA, and they're kind of the same. And I wanted to talk about how they're the same and why is it. I mean, it's kind of a notable thing. Like it puts the issues of our time in a certain kind of relief, right? And it kind of maybe has symbolic import to have a MAGA, however you want to say it. Probably we're Americans, so we should say MAGA. MAGA sounds like British, right? So we should. It's interesting. So we have MAGA apologists, evangelical or fundamentalist apologists, having a rousing discussion together about all the evils of the world. And so I wanted to, I've had this insight roiling around. Is that the right word? Not broiling, roiling around in my brain. And in fact, I wrote about it in my book, Out of the Mind, too. I have a chapter in there where I do a comparison, but honestly, I think that I have my way of stating it is a little more pointed now, so it's an improvement. So the point being, the overlap, in the Venn diagram of MAGA and fundamentalist Christians, there's a huge overlap, right? Very large. In some cases, it's the same circle. So the question is, what is it that makes those same groups of people fall for, become committed to, become fascinated by the same set of issues, and even where the actual content is different, the dynamics are the same, right? And so here's what I came up with. And I came up with this while doing a different video, which didn't work out, so I'm not publishing it. But that's one of the reasons I do these videos, is because for some reason, when I'm driving and talking to my phone, my brain just works in a different way. And I know that sometimes I say and ah, and sometimes I get a little lost. But there are moments when I'm yeah, I nailed that one. So if you are listening, thank you. And maybe you also aware that, sometimes there's some pauses and whatever. But I do nail it sometimes. And so it might be worth, slogging through the rest of it. But so here it is, after all that fanfare. So it's it's compelling, emotionally compelling narratives that are fairly disconnected to reality. That's the thing that holds them together. Religion tells emotionally compelling narratives that are essentially disconnected from reality. And you might even say, yeah, literally, because they're stories about things that aren't real. I mean, even a Christian could almost agree with that if you posited it as, compelling stories about non-earthly realities, right? And they might say, yeah, that's actually what it is. Of course, I agree, but I don't think there is such a thing as supernaturalism or non-earthly realities or miracles or anything like that. So to me, it's compelling narratives that have no basis, right? And MAGA is the same. MAGA is the same. MAGA. I'm having trouble with that. I don't know why. Is essentially the same, because MAGA is emotionally compelling narratives, really emotionally compelling narratives involving bad people that want to hurt you and destroy our country and all this complete bullshit. But they are compelling. If you believe them, they're compelling. and they're unrelated to reality, though they do have a connection, and religion also has this, which is that there is a kind of superficial justification for the narratives, right? But they're just like impressionistic and just not tight, right? And so, for example, the fear of foreigners, right? Especially of different foreigners, people with dark skin, people who are taller or shorter, or dress different, or eat different food, have different music. It seems ludicrous when you actually just state it as a reality, but it's true that there's a basic human instinct to be nervous about different kinds of people. There just is. And so we live in a country, in a culture where there are many types of different people around us, right? And depending on where you live, that will be more or less. Of course, urban situations have more difference, rural situation has less difference. But so there is a connection to reality in a sense, but it's just a superficial connection, an impressionistic one, and a very emotional one. And so, when you see, here's a classic example of that. I had a job at a software company, and there was a couple there who were from South Africa, and they both worked there. Okay, so a buddy of mine and I worked there, and we both speak Spanish, like fluent. And so we were talking with the wife, and she walked away, and I said something to my buddy in Spanish, and we both laughed, and it had nothing to do with her. But looking at it from the outside, it could have seemed like that English speaker just left, and they switched to Spanish in order to make fun of her. And her husband had overheard this somehow. I don't know. He was like in a wholly different apartment. I don't even know how that happened, but he emailed the two of us. Little asshole. He emailed the two of us and accused us, and was just like really obnoxious of making fun of his wife. And a part of me was just like, fuck you, I'm not even going to answer this. But then another part of me thought, okay, fine, I'll just lay this to rest. And I said, we are saying nothing about her. I think I even translated to him what we said just so he would know, which I kind of feel like I should just tell him to fuck off. But see what I mean? Like, it's very easy to misinterpret situations involving foreigners. Like, it's super easy. In fact, it's almost like the default mode, right? And so what MAGA does, and what Trump is brilliant at, is, and he is a fucking genius at this, he has this just raw intuition for the kinds of things that upset people today in our context. And so he just like pushes, he just like sticks his finger in it, and he just like, he does, like, he just goes for it. He goes for all those pressure points where people are nervous, scared, upset, and where there's like, it's all just because of, having an unkind heart and being afraid. And he just runs with those things, and he uses those to gain power. That's exactly what's happening, and that's what fascism is basically, right? You understand the fears of the population, and so you exaggerate them and tell them that you're going to solve their fears. You make up fears that, it's not like they're made out from whole cloth. The fears are crafted together from the true fears of the population, but the fears of the population are unkind and impressionistic, right? So there's two ways to avoid falling into that argumentation. One is simply to be kind, right? And to just, when you see a situation, to have like the personal insight that when you see a situation that makes you nervous, to check yourself and go, well, wait a minute, why would I assume the worst of people? And then maybe it helps to travel, because then you're on the opposite side of that, and you might think, well, when I was in, Mexico, I was doing the same thing they were doing, only in English, and I had good intentions, so maybe they have good intentions too. And to just be like reasonable about it, instead of jumping to the most unkind interpretation, right? The other way you can guard against this is by just having like a sense of connecting claims to information, right? And this, I mean, if you have any kind of instinct like that, you're not going to be able to listen to MAGA apologists very much, because they just say so many things that are manifestly false that, if you care about accuracy, it's just going to be upsetting, right? And so maybe those are kind of the paths, right? Like, what makes a difference between one person and another? And I know this is a moralistic judgment, so, take it for what it is. But on the one hand, just unkindness when it comes to looking at other people, and the willingness to just to think the worst. And then just a lack of information processing ability, right? Maybe those are the things that make the difference. But I want to emphasize that in fundamentalist churches and evangelical churches, and perhaps others as well, perhaps even in the liberal churches, there is a culture of believing emotionally compelling stories that have very little connection to reality, right? Because it's the same issue there. It's like, well, you look around and it seems like all of this must have come from somewhere. I mean, I look at all these beautiful trees on this mountain and this lake, and I think to myself, how could this have just not come from somebody who imagined, who created it, like a personal person who understands how it makes me feel? How could it not have come? So that's an impression, right? But as soon as you actually study, where things come from, how biology works, how geology works, how the human brain works, then those questions become answered, and you don't have to posit a God to explain them. So similarly, you have impressionistic thinking, you have compelling emotional narratives that are best based on things that seem true, but maybe you didn't think it through clearly enough. When you think it clearly enough, it's like, maybe that doesn't work, That's the overlap. It's that kind of thinking. I think we really need to be careful about these emotionally compelling, impressionistically founded narratives. I mean, I see it all the time at work in MAGA people that I know. And that's where, you always want to counter with facts, but it doesn't work. It just doesn't work, because by this time they have habituated themselves to a certain kind of emotion that they connect with something being true. And the facts that you present to them do not produce that emotional response, and so it just doesn't seem credible to them. It doesn't matter. You could be like, here's a 10-page, blow by blow, absolutely pristine knockdown of all the MAGA claims and why they're wrong, and they would just read through it and go I don't find this convincing. They might not say that. They'll be like, whatever, come up with some bullshit. But that's the problem. Is it's about an emotionally compelling narrative, and once you've arrived at the emotional compelling narrative through impressionistic thinking and neglect of factual basis, once you have arrived at it, now it's really hard, right? It's really hard to get out of it now, because again, you're just surrounded by a particular kind of feeling about these issues, and the only way to get you out of that is to disconnect the feelings first, or somehow, get you to see the issue differently. And that's where maybe dialogue does help, because maybe somebody says something that is that does make you think. Maybe they're, I'm not saying dialogue is useless. I don't think that's true. But I just think we need to recognize that these are impressionistic and emotional, and so you can't typically answer impressionism. That's a thing, not the artwork, not the art style, and emotion with factual engagement. And I don't know that you can answer it with emotion either. It just seems like something to me that just shifts in cycles, long-term cycles. If you're really convinced of something on this level, a pretty good chance that you're not going to become unconvinced, which is kind of depressing, because that means that, like, for the rest of my life, I'm going to have to be dealing with MAGA bullshit. Like, it may change, but it'll take a couple generations. That's kind of unfortunate. Whew. Well, on that pleasant thought, I better go in and buy my battery.